The air hung heavy with the acrid smell of burnt metal and plasma discharge. Sean crouched behind the makeshift barricade at the edge of the massive bridge, his breathing steady despite the chaos that surrounded him. The Katha Empire's mechanical soldiers were closing in, 500 of them, each one a perfect killing machine designed with ruthless efficiency. "Hold the bridge at all costs, soldier," had been his final order, crackling through his comm unit before it went silent. The rest of his squad was gone now, their bodies scattered across the battlefield like discarded toys. Sean was the last line of defense between the advancing army and the human settlement that lay vulnerable beyond the bridge. Above, the sleek command ship of the Katha Empire hovered like a predatory bird, its gleaming hull reflecting the scarlet glow of the dying sun. Inside that ship, Princess Manelia stood rigid before the holographic display, her slender fingers tracing the outline of the lone human defender. "Curious," she murmured, her voice like polished crystal. "He remains despite certain defeat." Supreme Commander Vorak, a towering figure with skin the color of burnished bronze, nodded solemnly. "The humans often display illogical behavior in combat. It is inefficient, yet effective. Sometimes," Manelia countered, her eyes never leaving the display. Something about the human soldier's stance captivated her, a defiance that bordered on madness, yet seemed calculated in its chaos. "Your Highness," Vorak cautioned, "do not allow yourself to be distracted by primitive tactics. The convergence forces will eliminate him, and we will secure another strategic victory for the Empire." Manelia nodded absently, but a seed of doubt had been planted in her mind. On the bridge, Sean checked his weapons one last time. His arsenal was limited: a plasma rifle with 2 power cells, 3 pulse grenades, a combat knife, and whatever he could salvage from the battlefield. Against 500 mechanical soldiers, it seemed laughable. But Sean wasn't planning a conventional defense. The first wave of mechanical soldiers advanced with perfect synchronicity, their movements a testament to the mathematical precision that defined the Katha military doctrine. 50 identical metal warriors, each step calculated to minimize exposure while maximizing offensive capability. Sean smiled grimly. Perfection was predictable. He waited until they reached the midpoint of the bridge before triggering the first trap, a series of explosive charges he'd hastily planted in the support struts. The resulting blast didn't destroy the bridge, but it created a 10-foot gap in the center, sending the first line of soldiers plummeting into the abyss below. In the command ship, alarms blared as the holographic display flickered with the sudden loss of troops. "Impossible," Vorak hissed, his composure cracking. "Our scouts confirmed no explosives." "He must have placed them while retreating," Manelia observed, unable to hide the note of admiration in her voice. The next wave of mechanical soldiers adjusted their approach, using grappling systems to traverse the gap. Sean had anticipated this. As they swung across, he targeted the anchor points with precise shots from his plasma rifle, sending another dozen machines tumbling into the chasm. "Remarkable," Manelia whispered. "He's forcing our advanced units to behave predictably by limiting their options." Vorak scowled. "A temporary advantage. The convergence will adapt." And adapt they did. The third wave split into smaller groups, attempting to overwhelm Sean with diversified attack vectors. But he had used the brief respite to reconfigure the battlefield, creating choke points with debris and setting up crossfire zones. As the battle progressed, Manelia found herself leaning closer to the display, entranced by the humans' unconventional tactics, where Katha military doctrine emphasized symmetry and synchronized movements. This human embraced chaos, constantly shifting his position, never establishing patterns that could be analyzed and countered. "His combat methodology defies our predictive algorithms," she noted, reviewing the data streams that poured in from the battlefield. "Each time our forces calculate his next move, he does something entirely unexpected." "It is merely desperation," Vorak insisted, though his tone lacked conviction. The random thrashings of a cornered animal. But Manelia saw something else. A deliberate embrace of unpredictability. A tactical approach that turned the Convergence's greatest strength into a vulnerability. The mechanical soldiers were designed to identify patterns and counter them with mathematical precision. Against an opponent who created no discernible patterns, they struggled to adapt. On the bridge, Sean was bleeding from a dozen minor wounds, his breathing ragged as he darted from one position to another. He'd managed to reduce the enemy force by almost 100 units, but exhaustion was setting in, and his resources were dwindling. The next wave of mechanical soldiers advanced more cautiously, their programming adjusted to account for his erratic movements. They began using suppressive fire to limit his mobility, gradually tightening the noose around his position. Sean grimaced as a plasma bolt grazed his shoulder, searing through his armor and leaving a blackened furrow in his flesh. He ducked behind a fallen support beam, quickly assessing his options. His rifle was down to its last power cell, and he had only one pulse grenade left. Time for something truly unexpected. He loaded his final pulse grenade into a makeshift sling, calculated the trajectory, and launched it not at the advancing soldiers, but at the bridge's support structure directly beneath them. The resulting explosion didn't destroy the support entirely, but it compromised its integrity, causing that section of the bridge to tilt precariously. 20 more mechanical soldiers lost their footing and slid into the abyss, while others scrambled to stable ground, their perfect formation shattered. In the command ship, Manelia watched with growing fascination as the human continued to defy the odds. His tactics weren't just random, they were adaptive, exploiting weaknesses in the Convergence's approach that even the Katha military analysts had overlooked. "He's not fighting the way we expect humans to fight," she mused. "He's fighting the way we can't predict." "It changes nothing," Vorak insisted. "We still have over 300 units in reserve. He is one man, injured and outgunned. His defeat is inevitable." Manelia's gaze lingered on the holographic representation of the human soldier. Perhaps, but at what cost? Each unit he destroys represents resources that could be better allocated elsewhere. This bridge is strategic, yes, but is it worth such losses? "Your Highness," Vorak said stiffly, "may I remind you that questioning military strategy is not within the purview of your royal duties? You are here to observe and learn, not to critique." Manelia straightened, her expression cooling. "I am here as the future Empress of Katha, Commander Vorak. Everything concerning our empire's future is within my purview." The tension between them was palpable, but further discussion was interrupted by new developments on the battlefield. Sean had changed tactics again. Instead of continuing to hold his position at the edge of the bridge, he was now advancing toward the enemy, using the uneven terrain created by the damaged bridge to his advantage. He moved like a ghost through the smoke and debris, striking at individual units before melting back into the chaos. It was suicide by any conventional military assessment, yet somehow he was succeeding in further disrupting the Convergence's formation. "What is he doing?" Vorak muttered, his composure finally cracking. "This defies all tactical logic." "No," Manelia said quietly. "It defies our tactical logic. That's precisely why it's working." She watched as the human disabled another mechanical soldier with his combat knife, targeting vulnerable joint servos that most opponents wouldn't know to exploit. How had he gained such intimate knowledge of Katha technology? The answer came when she observed him quickly salvaging components from the disabled unit, power cells, targeting modules, even weapon systems. He wasn't just fighting, he was learning, adapting, and using the enemy's own technology against them. "Remarkable," she whispered. Vorak was now issuing rapid commands to the remaining Convergence units, attempting to counter the humans' unpredictable movements with sheer force. "Surround and overwhelm," he ordered. "All units, converge on the target from all available vectors." It was a desperate strategy. one that sacrificed efficiency for brute force. The mechanical soldiers began to move in a coordinated wave, their individual tactical programs temporarily overridden by Vorak's direct command. Sean saw the change in their behavior immediately. The methodical, precise movements had been replaced by a straightforward advance, all subtlety abandoned in favor of overwhelming force. He retreated to a defensible position, knowing he couldn't withstand such an assault head-on. His back was literally against the wall now, the remnants of his barricade offering minimal protection as plasma bolts rained down around him. He returned fire sparingly, making each shot count, but the advancing wall of mechanical soldiers seemed endless. In the command ship, Manelia watched the holographic display with growing concern. The human's life signs were weakening, his heart rate erratic, his body temperature dropping as shock set in from multiple injuries. He fought well, Vorak observed dispassionately. For a human, something inside Manelia rebelled at the clinical dismissal of such extraordinary courage. This human had held off an overwhelming force through sheer ingenuity and will. He had exposed flaws in their military doctrine that no Katha strategist had identified. And now he would die, his insights lost forever. Unless... "Prepare my combat suit," she said suddenly. Vorak turned to her, his expression incredulous. "Your Highness?" "You heard me. Commander, I'm going down there." "That is absolutely forbidden," Vorak sputtered. "The royal protocols expressly prohibit direct involvement in combat operations. Your safety is my own concern." Manelia cut him off. "As future Empress, I need to understand all aspects of our military capabilities, including its weaknesses. This human has exposed critical flaws in our approach. Flaws that could be exploited on a larger scale if not addressed." "Then we will capture him for interrogation," Vorak countered. Manelia shook her head. "He won't survive that long. Look at his life signs." She gestured to the display, where the human's vital statistics continued to deteriorate. "No, I need to see his tactics firsthand, to understand what our analysts have missed." "I cannot allow this," Vorak said firmly. "If anything were to happen to you..." "You are not allowing anything, Commander," Manelia replied, her voice taking on the imperial tie that brooked no argument. "You are obeying the directive of your future Empress. Prepare my combat suit immediately, or I will have you relieved of duty for insubordination." The command center fell silent as the other officers pretended not to hear the exchange. Vorak's jaw worked silently for a moment before he gave a stiff nod. "As you command, Your Highness, but I must register my formal protest." "Duly noted," Manelia said, already moving toward the preparation chamber. "And, Commander, order the convergents to hold their current positions. I want to observe the human's tactics without interference. That will give him time to recover and potentially escape." Vorak objected. "It will give him time to survive long enough for me to learn what I need to know." Manelia corrected him. "Issue the order." Minutes later, encased in the sleek, form-fitting combat suit that marked her as royalty, Manelia descended from the command ship in a personal transport pod. The battlefield came into sharp focus as she approached. The damaged bridge, the scattered remains of mechanical soldiers, and the lone human defender, now taking advantage of the unexpected lull to tend to his wounds. Sean looked up as the royal transport pod touched down 30 meters from his position. His grip tightened on his salvaged plasma rifle, though he knew it would be useless against the advanced shielding technology that protected Katha royalty. To his surprise, the figure that emerged from the pod was slender and feminine, moving with a grace that seemed at odds with the battlefield surroundings. The royal combat suit was unmistakable, iridescent armor that shifted colors like an oil slick, conforming perfectly to the wearer's body. "Didn't expect them to send royalty to finish the job," he muttered, wincing as he applied a medical sealant to a particularly nasty wound on his side. Manelia approached cautiously, her suit's sensors providing a steady stream of data about the human's condition. He was in worse shape than the holographic display had indicated: multiple plasma burns, shrapnel wounds, and the beginning stages of combat fatigue syndrome. Yet he still managed to look dangerous, his eyes alert and calculating as they tracked her movement. "I am Princess Menalia of the Katha Empire," she announced, stopping at a respectful distance. "And you are?" Sean gave a pained chuckle. "Just Sean. No fancy titles here. Your Highness, you've managed to destroy nearly a quarter of our convergence force." Menalia observed, "A remarkable achievement for just Sean." "I'm full of surprises," he replied, his voice strained but defiant. "If you're here to finish me off, you might want to call in some backup, royal or not. I don't plan to make it easy for you." "I'm not here to kill you," Menalia said, removing her helmet to reveal features that were almost human: high cheekbones, almond-shaped eyes with vertical pupils, and skin with a subtle bluish undertone. "I'm here to understand you." Sean's expression shifted from wariness to confusion. "Understand me? While your troops are taking a coffee break? Forgive me if I find that hard to believe. The convergence units have been ordered to hold their positions temporarily," Menalia explained. "At my command." "Why would you do that?" "Because you're doing something no human has done before, exploiting weaknesses in our military doctrine that we didn't know existed." "I want to know how." Sean studied her for a long moment, trying to discern any deception. Finding none, he slowly lowered his weapon. "It's not complicated," he said finally. "Your mechanical soldiers are too perfect." "Explain," Menalia prompted, genuinely intrigued. "Perfect symmetry, perfect timing, perfect formation." Sean elaborated. "It makes them predictable, even when they adapt. They adapt in predictable ways, because they're programmed to find and exploit patterns. When faced with chaos, true chaos, not just random actions, they struggle to compute effective responses." Menalia considered this. "But surely chaos has its own patterns." "That's the beautiful irony," Sean said with a grim smile. "The patterns in chaos only become apparent after the fact. In the moment, true chaos is, by definition, unpredictable. Your machines need time to analyze and adapt, time I don't give them." "And how did you learn to exploit Katha technology so effectively?" Menalia asked, gesturing to the salvaged components he had repurposed. "Trial and error, mostly," Sean admitted. "And I was part of a salvage team before joining the military. Spent a lot of time taking apart Katha tech that we recovered from battlefields. You'd be surprised what you can learn when you have to rebuild something from scrap." As they spoke, Menalia found herself increasingly fascinated by this human's perspective. His approach to warfare was so fundamentally different from the Katha doctrine she had been raised to revere, where her people saw military action as a mathematical equation to be solved. He saw it as an art form, fluid and adaptable. "Your tactics," she said thoughtfully, "they remind me of ancient Katha hunting methods, before we embraced technological perfection. Our ancestors used to say that to catch the most elusive prey, one must become like water, formless, adaptable, finding the path of least resistance." "Smart ancestors," Sean commented. "We have similar sayings." A notification flashed across Menalia's helmet display: Vorak, demanding an update and reminding her that the convergence units could not be held in position indefinitely without compromising their operational integrity. "My commander is growing impatient," she said, her expression troubled. "I cannot delay the advance much longer." Sean nodded, his momentary respite coming to an end. "Then I guess we go back to being enemies." But Menalia wasn't ready to accept that conclusion. Something about this human and his approach had awakened questions she had been silently harboring for years. Questions about the rigid structures of Katha society, about the infallibility of their military doctrine, about her own role as a royal observer rather than an active participant in shaping her empire's future. "What if we didn't?" she asked suddenly. Sean looked up sharply. "Didn't what?" "Go back to being enemies." Manilia's mind was racing now, possibilities unfolding before her. "What if we combined our approaches? Your chaos and our precision?" "You're talking about defecting," Sean said incredulously. "Abandoning your people?" "No," Manilia shook her head emphatically. "I'm talking about saving them, about evolving beyond the limitations of our current doctrine. The Katha Empire has become stagnant. Sean, we've relied on technological perfection for so long that we've forgotten how to adapt, how to truly innovate." She gestured to the battlefield around them. "This, what you've done here, it's a warning. Today it's one human holding a bridge against impossible odds. Tomorrow it could be a new strategy that our perfect machines can't counter, leading to defeat on a much larger scale." Sean studied her with newfound interest. "So, what are you proposing, Princess?" Before Manilia could respond, her helmet display flashed with an urgent warning. Vorak had overridden her command. The convergence units were advancing again, closing in on their position from all sides. "It seems we're out of time for discussion," she said grimly, replacing her helmet. "I need to make a choice." In the command ship, Vorak watched with growing alarm as Princess Manelia remained in close proximity to the human soldier. Their extended conversation was unprecedented and dangerous. Royal protocols expressly forbade such direct interaction with enemy combatants. "All units, advance and secure the princess," he ordered. "Consider the human subject armed and extremely dangerous. Lethal force is authorized." The mechanical soldiers resumed their march across the bridge, moving with renewed purpose toward the position where Manelia and Sean stood. Manelia saw them coming and made her decision. "Commander Vorak," she transmitted, her voice carrying the full weight of royal authority. "Countermand that order immediately." "I cannot do that, Your Highness," Vorak replied stiffly. "Your safety is paramount. That human is a demonstrated threat to our forces." "Then you leave me no choice," Manelia said. She turned to Sean, her decision made. "I'm fighting with you." Sean's eyes widened in disbelief. "You can't be serious. They're your people." "And they're making a mistake," Manelia replied firmly. "One I cannot allow to continue. My people need to evolve, to learn from what you've demonstrated here today. Sometimes, the only way forward is through direct action." She raised her hand, activating the advanced weapons systems integrated into her royal combat suit. "I know their tactics, their vulnerabilities. Together, we might actually survive this." Sean stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, Princess. Let's show them what chaos and precision can do together." In the command ship, alarms blared as Manilia's combat status shifted from observer to engaged. Vorak watched in horror as the princess fired her first shot, not at the human, but at the advancing convergence units. "All units, hold position," he shouted, desperate to prevent what was unfolding. "Do not return fire on the princess. I repeat, do not engage the princess." But the convergence units had already been programmed to eliminate threats, and Manilia had just identified herself as one. They continued their advance, now targeting both the human and the princess with equal priority. On the bridge, Manilia moved with the fluid grace of elite Katha royal guards, her combat suit enhancing her natural agility as she targeted weak points in the mechanical soldier's armor. Beside her, Sean fought with controlled desperation, his chaotic movements complementing her precision. "Left flank," Manilia called out, identifying a group of soldiers attempting to circle around their position. Sean responded instantly, throwing his last salvaged plasma grenade to disperse the flanking units. "They're adapting to our combined tactics," he observed. "We need to keep changing our approach." "Agreed," Manilia replied. She accessed her suit's tactical systems, analyzing the battlefield with enhanced clarity. The primary command node is in that unit at the center, the one with the red markings. If we can disable it, the others will revert to individual tactical programs, making them easier to deal with. "Can you get me close enough?" Sean asked. Manelia nodded. "Cover me while I create a diversion." She activated her suit's stealth field, becoming partially transparent as she moved toward the right flank of the convergence formation. The mechanical soldiers immediately adjusted, their sensors tracking her despite the stealth technology. This was exactly what she had anticipated. While they focused on her, Sean was able to slip through a gap in their formation, moving steadily toward the command node unit. In the command ship, Vorak watched the unfolding situation with a mixture of rage and disbelief. The princess had not only disobeyed direct orders, but was actively fighting alongside an enemy combatant against Imperial forces. "Prepare my combat suit," he ordered. "I'm going down there myself." "Sir," one of the junior officers ventured cautiously. "Protocol dictates that in the event of royal combat engagement, command staff are to remain." "I am well aware of the protocols," Vorak snapped. "But those protocols never anticipated a member of the royal family committing treason." As Vorak prepared to intervene personally, Manelia and Sean continued their coordinated assault on the convergence forces. They moved like dance partners who had rehearsed for years, each anticipating the other's movements and complementing them perfectly. Manelia's precise targeting disabled key systems in the mechanical soldiers, while Sean's unpredictable movements prevented the remaining units from establishing effective counterattacks. Together, they carved a path toward the command node, leaving disabled machines in their wake. "Almost there," Sean panted, his injuries taking their toll despite the momentary surge of adrenaline. "How do we take it down?" "The central processing core is protected by reinforced armor," Manelia explained, firing a precision shot that disabled another soldier. "But there's a maintenance access port on the lower back quadrant. If you can reach it, I can transmit a shutdown code through my suit's interface." Sean nodded, already formulating a plan. "I'll need covering fire." "You'll have it," Manelia promised. They moved in tandem, Manelia drawing the command node's attention with a series of targeted shots while Sean circled around, using the disabled mechanical soldiers as cover. When he was in position, he gave Manelia a quick hand signal. She immediately intensified her attack, forcing the command node to focus all its defensive systems on her position. This gave Sean the opening he needed to dart forward and access the maintenance port. "Now!" he shouted, plugging a salvaged interface module into the port. Manelia activated her suit's transmission system, sending the shutdown code directly into the command node's processors. For a moment, nothing happened, then the unit's lights flickered and went dark. The effect on the remaining convergence forces was immediate and dramatic. Without the coordinating influence of the command node, they reverted to individual tactical programs, their movements becoming disjointed and uncoordinated. "It's working," Sean exclaimed, a note of triumph in his voice. But their victory was short-lived. A new transport pod descended from the command ship, landing with a heavy thud at the far end of the bridge. The figure that emerged was imposing, a combat suit similar to Manelia's, but larger and more heavily armed. "Vorak," Manelia breathed, recognizing the commander's distinctive armor configuration. "Princess Manelia," Vorak's voice boomed across the battlefield, amplified by his suit's external speakers. "You are hereby ordered to stand down and return to the command ship immediately. Your actions constitute high treason against the Katha Empire. My actions constitute evolution." "Commander," Manelia replied defiantly, "something our empire has forgotten how to embrace." Vorak advanced slowly, his weapon systems powering up. "Step away from the human. Your Highness, I don't wish to harm you, but I will do what is necessary to uphold imperial law." Sean moved protectively in front of Menelia, his salvaged weapon looking pitiful compared to Vorak's advanced arsenal. "You'll have to go through me first," he said grimly. "With pleasure," Vorak growled, raising his weapon. But before he could fire, Menelia stepped forward, removing her helmet once again. "Commander Vorak, I invoke Royal Prerogative Protocol 7. Vorak froze, his weapon still raised but not firing. "That protocol has not been used in 3 generations, Your Highness. Nevertheless, it remains valid imperial law," Menelia countered. "As a member of the royal family, I have the right to suspend military operations if I believe they run counter to the Empire's best interests. I am exercising that right now." "The Council will never support this," Vorak warned. "Perhaps not initially," Menelia conceded. "But they will listen to reason when presented with evidence." She gestured to the battlefield around them. "One human, Commander, one human with unconventional tactics managed to destroy a quarter of our convergence force. Imagine what an army using similar methods could do." "It was luck," Vorak insisted. "A statistical anomaly." "Then explain how the 2 of us managed to disable the command node and disrupt the entire remaining force," Menelia challenged. "Was that luck as well?" Vorak had no immediate answer. The evidence was there before him: the disabled command node, the disorganized convergence units, the success of Menelia and Sean's combined approach. "What exactly are you proposing, Your Highness?" he asked finally, lowering his weapon slightly. "A new doctrine," Menelia replied. "One that combines the precision and technological superiority of the Katha with the adaptability and unpredictability of human tactics. A hybrid approach that addresses the weaknesses in both our military strategies." "And the human?" Vorak nodded toward Sean, who was struggling to remain standing as the adrenaline of battle began to fade. "A military advisor," Menelia said firmly, "under my personal protection." Sean looked at her in surprise. "I don't remember agreeing to that." "Would you prefer I leave you here to face the remaining convergence units alone?" Menelia asked with a raised eyebrow. "When you put it that way." Sean managed a weak smile. "Advisor sounds pretty good." Vorak considered the situation for a long moment. His duty was clear. The princess had violated multiple imperial protocols and aligned herself with an enemy combatant. By law, he should arrest her and return her to the capital for trial. But something in her words resonated with doubts he had harbored for years. The Katha military had become increasingly reliant on technological superiority, neglecting the development of adaptive strategies. Recent conflicts had shown that this approach was becoming less effective as their enemies learned to counter their predictable tactics. Perhaps the princess was right. Perhaps evolution was necessary. "I will escort you both to the command ship," he said finally. "The Council must hear your proposal directly. Your Highness, I make no promises beyond that." Menelia nodded, accepting this as the best outcome she could hope for under the circumstances. She turned to Sean, who was now visibly swaying on his feet. "Can you make it to the transport?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "If it means not dying on this bridge, I'll crawl there if I have to," Sean replied, attempting to mask his pain with humor. Menelia supported him as they made their way to Vorak's transport pod, the remaining convergence units standing down at the commander's signal. As they boarded, Sean looked back at the bridge, the site of a battle that had begun as a last stand and somehow transformed into something much more significant. "You know," he said quietly to Menelia, "when they ordered me to hold the bridge, I never expected to survive, let alone end up as an advisor to alien royalty. And when I observed you from my command ship, I never expected to abandon my throne to fight beside you." Menelia replied with a small smile. "It seems we both defied expectations today." As the transport pod ascended toward the command ship, Sean felt a strange sense of hope amidst his exhaustion. He had fought to protect his people, expecting to die in the process. Instead, he had potentially helped forge a new path, one that might eventually lead to understanding between humans and the Katha, rather than endless conflict. Beside him, Manelia was already formulating how she would present their case to the Imperial Council. She knew the path ahead would not be easy. Tradition and doctrine were deeply ingrained in Katha society, and change was often viewed with suspicion. But today had shown her what was possible when different approaches were combined, when chaos and order worked in harmony rather than opposition. The hybrid doctrine she envisioned would not just reform Katha military strategy, it could potentially transform the relationship between their species. "What are you thinking about?" Sean asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "The future," Manelia replied, "and how different it might be because of what happened on that bridge today." Sean nodded, understanding. "One battle doesn't win a war." "No," Manelia agreed, "but it can change how the war is fought, and sometimes that makes all the difference." As the command ship prepared to return to Katha space, both Sean and Manelia knew that the real challenge was just beginning. They had survived against overwhelming odds and taken the first steps toward a new understanding between their peoples. Whether that understanding would flourish or wither remained to be seen, but they had created the possibility where none had existed before. And in a war that had seemed endless and unwinnable, possibility was the most precious resource of all. In the weeks that followed, Sean's presence in the Katha imperial court caused considerable controversy. Many officials viewed him with suspicion and outright hostility, seeing him as an enemy combatant who had somehow bewitched their princess. Others, particularly younger military officers who had grown frustrated with the rigid tactical doctrine, were cautiously intrigued by the hybrid approach Manelia proposed. For his part, Sean struggled to adapt to life among the Katha. Their society was as ordered and precise as their military tactics, a stark contrast to the chaotic, adaptable human settlements he had known. Simple things like meal times, communication protocols, and even walking patterns were governed by rules and traditions that seemed arbitrary to him but were sacred to the Katha. "You're doing it again," Manelia observed one day as they walked through the imperial gardens, a rare moment of relative privacy in their otherwise scrutinized existence. "Doing what?" Sean asked. "Walking chaotically," she replied with a small smile. Katha formal walks are conducted in straight lines with precisely timed turns at designated reflection points. Sean looked down at the intricate pathway, noting the subtle markers he had been ignoring. "How do you live like this? Everything regulated? Everything planned to the last detail?" "It's what we know," Manelia said simply. "Order has been the foundation of Katha society since the Great Calamity 3 centuries ago. It was chaos that nearly destroyed us then. Unregulated technological development, unpredictable climate shifts, social upheaval. Order saved us, gave us structure when everything was falling apart." "So you overcorrected," Sean suggested. "Embraced order so completely that you lost the benefits of adaptability." Manelia considered this. "Perhaps, but remember that your human societies have their own rigid structures. They're just less visible to you because you've been immersed in them your entire life." It was these kinds of conversations, these exchanges of perspective, that gradually began to shape their hybrid doctrine. What had begun as a military strategy was evolving into something more comprehensive, a new philosophical approach that recognized the value of both order and chaos, structure and adaptability. The Imperial Council remained skeptical, but Manelia was persistent. She arranged controlled military exercises where mixed units of mechanical soldiers and human-trained Katha officers demonstrated the effectiveness of the hybrid approach against traditional convergence tactics. The results were undeniable. The hybrid units consistently outperformed the traditional ones, adapting to changing battlefield conditions with a fluidity that pure convergence forces couldn't match. "You see," Manelia argued in yet another council session, "the data supports our approach. The hybrid units show a 37% increase in effectiveness across all measured parameters. Military effectiveness is not the only consideration, Your Highness, countered Councillor Thenax, one of the most conservative voices on the Imperial Council. There are cultural implications to consider. This hybrid doctrine undermines the very foundations of Katha society. It does not undermine them, Manelia insisted. It builds upon them, strengthens them by addressing their weaknesses. A foundation that cannot adapt will eventually crumble, no matter how perfectly constructed it may appear. The debate raged for months, with Manelia and Sean gradually gathering supporters among the younger generation of Katha officials and military officers. Sean found himself becoming not just a military advisor, but a cultural ambassador, helping the Katha understand human perspectives while simultaneously learning to appreciate the benefits of Katha precision and order. It was during this period that his relationship with Manelia deepened beyond their initial battlefield alliance. They spent long hours together, developing their doctrine, navigating imperial politics, and sharing stories of their vastly different lives. What had begun as mutual respect evolved into something more complex, a connection that transcended their cultural differences. "You never told me why you really came down to the bridge that day," Sean said one evening as they reviewed tactical simulations in Manelia's private study. "You could have observed everything from your command ship. Why risk yourself?" Manelia was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the holographic display. "Because observation without understanding is meaningless," she said finally. "I needed to see you up close, to understand what drove you to hold that bridge against impossible odds." "And did you understand? I began to," she acknowledged. "I saw something in you that day, a kind of freedom that the Katha have forgotten. Not just tactical freedom, but something more fundamental. The freedom to make choices based on something other than predetermined protocols and statistical probabilities. Some would call that recklessness," Sean noted with a wry smile. "Perhaps," Manelia conceded. "But I've come to believe that a certain amount of recklessness is necessary for growth, for evolution. The Katha have been stagnant for too long, clinging to order because we fear the alternatives. As their work progressed, resistance to the hybrid doctrine began to wane. Practical results were difficult to argue with, and even the most conservative council members couldn't deny the effectiveness of the new approach. What had seemed radical was gradually becoming accepted, if not yet embraced. And then came the Nexus Offensive. A massive coordinated attack by human forces targeted multiple Katha outposts along the contested border regions. Traditional convergence units were overwhelmed by the new human tactics, which seemed eerily familiar to those who had studied Sean and Manelia's reports. "They're using our own doctrine against us," Vorak observed grimly as they reviewed the battle data. The commander had become a reluctant ally over time, his military pragmatism eventually overcoming his ideological reservations. "The humans have adapted more quickly than anticipated." "Not our doctrine," Manelia corrected him. "Half of our doctrine. They've embraced chaos without the balancing precision. That makes them vulnerable." Sean studied the tactical displays, recognizing the patterns. "She's right. They're overextending, becoming predictable in their unpredictability. If we deploy the hybrid units now, we can counter this offensive and potentially end the conflict." The decision was not Manelia's to make. Despite her royal status, she was still subject to the Imperial Council's authority in matters of war. But her influence had grown considerably, and when she presented her analysis, the Council listened. "Deploy the hybrid units," the Imperial Regent commanded, his tone solemn. "And may the Founders forgive us if we have erred." The battle that followed was unlike any in the long history of human Katha conflict. The hybrid units moved with a fluidity that confused the human forces, combining Katha precision with unpredictable tactical shifts that couldn't be easily countered. What had been intended as a decisive human offensive became a carefully managed retreat. But it wasn't a massacre. That was the most remarkable aspect of the engagement. The hybrid doctrine wasn't focused solely on destruction. It incorporated concepts of minimal necessary force and strategic paralysis rather than annihilation. When the dust settled, the human forces had been decisively defeated, but with remarkably few casualties on either side. Strategic objectives had been secured without the wholesale destruction that had characterized previous conflicts. In the aftermath, something unprecedented occurred. The human military command requested a formal parley, not just a temporary ceasefire, but a genuine diplomatic engagement. "They recognize what we've accomplished," Manelia told Sean as they prepared for the diplomatic mission. "Not just militarily, but philosophically. We've shown that there's a middle path between their chaos and our order." Sean nodded, adjusting the formal Katha attire he had been provided for the occasion. It felt strange after months in adapted military gear, but it was symbolically important. "It's a start," he agreed. "But we have a long way to go." "Indeed," Manelia said, studying him with an intensity that made Sean slightly uncomfortable. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you. Sean, when this conflict is resolved, if it can be resolved, what then? Will you return to your people?" The question caught him off guard. He hadn't allowed himself to think that far ahead, focusing instead on the immediate challenges of developing the hybrid doctrine and navigating Katha politics. "I don't know," he admitted. "I'm not sure where I belong anymore. I'm not fully Katha, obviously, but after everything we've done together, I'm not sure I'm fully human either, at least not in the way I was before." Manelia smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed her usually composed features. "Perhaps that's the point. Perhaps neither of us is what we were before that day on the bridge. We've both evolved, changed by our experiences together." "Into what, though?" Sean asked. "Into something new," Manelia replied simply. "Something that's neither purely Katha nor purely human, but a hybrid, like our doctrine." As they departed for the diplomatic mission that would potentially reshape the relationship between their species, Sean reflected on the strange journey that had brought him to this point. He had been ordered to hold a bridge against impossible odds, expected to die in a last stand that would be quickly forgotten. Instead, he had found himself at the center of a transformation that extended far beyond military tactics. The hybrid doctrine had become more than a strategy. It was evolving into a new way of thinking, a philosophy that recognized the value of both chaos and order, unpredictability and precision. And perhaps most unexpectedly, he had found in Manelia something he had never anticipated, a kindred spirit who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. Someone who had been willing to abandon the security of her throne to fight beside him when it mattered most. "Ready?" Manelia asked as they boarded the diplomatic vessel. Sean nodded, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "As ready as I'll ever be to help rewrite the relationship between two species that have been trying to destroy each other for generations." "Good," Manelia replied with characteristic directness, "because that's exactly what we're going to do." As the vessel departed for the neutral meeting ground, both Sean and Manelia knew that the challenges ahead would be even more daunting than the battle on the bridge. Changing tactical doctrines was difficult. Changing ingrained prejudices and historical animosities would be far harder. But they had already accomplished what many had deemed impossible. They had shown that chaos and order need not be opposing forces, that they could complement each other, creating something stronger and more adaptable than either alone. And in doing so, they had opened a door to a future that neither of their peoples had imagined possible. A future where differences were not just tolerated but valued, where diversity of approach was seen as strength rather than weakness. It had all begun on that bridge, with a human soldier who refused to accept defeat and a Katha princess who dared to question centuries of doctrine. One had held the bridge against 500 enemies. The other had abandoned her throne to fight beside him. Together, they had changed everything.